the town administrator for the town of Marshfield, and I want to welcome Marshfield and Duxbury residents to this public outreach meeting to talk tonight about the requested beach nourishment easements and a project update on where we are with the project in both towns of Marshfield and Duxbury. The towns of Marshfield and Duxbury, as folks know, were awarded a grant from Coastal Zone Management in the fall of 2019 for design and permitting of beach dune nourishment. Tonight, officials from both towns are here to help answer your questions that you may have regarding signing easements. It's very important that people sign the easement so that we'll have the opportunity to provide beach nourishment and protect the dunes. Your participation will help save the elevation of our beaches, seawalls, and revetment. So please come forward tonight. Do not be afraid to ask questions. Professionals are here to answer your questions, to calm you, and hopefully at the end of this, everyone will rush and sign off on the easements. So thank you for participating.
All right, I guess it's Leslie up next, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and I'll just say that if I can, thank you for coming. We are going to take questions a little bit later. If you want to ask questions during the discussion, please put them in the chat while we're hearing the presentation, and then we will try to get to as many questions as we can a little bit later in the presentation. But right now we're in a presentation format, but we do intend to take questions.
I think it might be helpful just to explain who the panelists are too, so that everybody.
Yeah. Okay. I'm Valerie Massard. I'm the town planner in Duxbury. Leslie Fields is the Woods Hole consultant who will be, has been working with us all on, with her expertise on oceanography. Rebecca Haney and Jason Burtner are here from the Coastal Zone Management Program, and they are providing a great deal of technical assistance to the two towns, as well as the source of the funding for the work that we're doing. Greg Gumet is my counterpart in Marshfield. He's the town planner there. And then Michael Moresco, you've already heard from, is the town administrator in Marshfield, and we're grateful that he's here to help steer the ship. And then we've also joined, we've been joined by attorney Bob Galvin, who represents the town of Marshfield, and attorney Sharon Everett, who represents the town of Duxbury through KP Law. Yes, that's your name now. It used to be Copon and Page. Caught myself. So with that, thank you very much for coming, and I will hand it off to Leslie. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Val. I have a PowerPoint presentation to go through that describes the need for the project and you know what the project will look like once it's implemented, and then towards the end we'll get into the why we need the easement signed, and the attorneys will be here to answer questions about what it means for you to sign those easements and the importance of them. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen and we'll get going with the presentation. Okay, sorry. All right, is that full screen?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, all right. So as was said before, my name is Leslie Fields. I work with the Woods Hole Group, and we're the consultants that have been working with the towns of Duxbury and Marshfield on this project. The project, which we've been working on for several years, is focused on building shoreline resiliency in Marshfield and Duxbury through beach and dune nourishment. As I said, I have about a 20-minute presentation that's going to describe the locations of where the towns are planning beach and dune nourishment, what the projects will look like, next steps in the permitting process, requirements from those property owners in order to implement the projects, and then expected schedule for implementation. The project is being funded through a CZM Coastal Resilience Grant. Ordinarily, we'd be having this meeting in a face-to-face public forum, but given the current situation with the coronavirus, we're having this virtual meeting. As Val said, we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. If you want to raise your hand, or if you want to type something in the chat box, you can do that, and we'll attempt to answer those questions. If for some reason you have questions that you think of after the presentation, or if it's just easier for you, you can certainly email those questions to Valerie or Greg in the Towns of Duxbury and Marshfield at the email address just shown on this slide, and they'll get back to you with answers. So this project builds on other work that was funded through the CZM Coastal Resiliency Grant Program. It is, right now, we are being funded to conduct environmental permitting and public education and outreach for beach and dune nourishment projects at critically eroded beaches in the towns of Marshfield and Duxbury. The towns received a grant for $281,318. That's what the project cost. The grant award was actually $210,922. So the towns are coming up with a match of $70,396, and that's a match of both cash and in-kind services. The grant this year started in September of 2020, and we should be done in June 30th of 2022. As I said, this project is building on previous work that CZM has funded. So a couple of years ago, Marshfield completed a project looking at beneficial reuse of materials that was dredged from Green Harbor. And so we looked at putting that material on the beaches to add resiliency. Duxbury Beach Reservation has received a number of CZM grants to look at ways and implement ways to build resiliency of that barrier beach. And most recently, the towns of Duxbury and Marshfield completed a FY20 CZM grant where the entire coastline was evaluated for sites that would be suitable for beach and dune nourishment as a way of building resiliency and protecting the seawalls and revetments and protecting those public and private properties that are behind the revetments. So this project is building on the work that was completed in that previous grant, and we are tasked with securing local, state, and federal permits that are necessary for the beach and dune nourishment, and also, as I said, conducting public education and outreach, much like this meeting tonight, just to educate the public on the importance of the projects. I have a few slides here at the beginning just to talk about why beach and dune nourishment is needed. I'll go over those quickly before we get into the specifics of what's actually being proposed. So we know that the shorelines in both towns have extensive coastal armoring. In Marshfield, 83% of that shoreline is armored with seawalls or revetments. And in Duxbury, 91% of the shoreline at the northern end of the coastline, north of Duxbury Beach Reservation, is armored with seawalls and revetments. So this armoring is shown in these red lines in this left graphic here. We can see from the photos on the right that are taken at Fieldston Beach, Bay Ave Beach, and Gurnet Rd Beach that the seawalls are exposed and deteriorating. The beaches are significantly lower in elevation than the seawalls, and the high water shoreline either directly at the seawalls or just immediately in front of the seawall. So this presents a pretty serious situation during storms, where there's higher water levels and the waves are crashing directly on the seawalls, and there's a lot of overtopping, which causes damage of the properties behind the seawalls. So this slide here illustrates some of the impacts of coastal armoring. There's clear benefits, which everyone I'm sure is aware of. So the walls act as the last line of defense for erosion. So once the beach erodes back to the seawall, though, it can't go any further. And while the properties behind the walls are protected from further erosion, the beach lowers in front of that seawall. So that seawall adversely impacts the beach by causing a lowering of that seawall or lowering of the beach, which then allows more overtopping. So this slide here also just sort of illustrates that sequence of events. If we have lower beach elevations, we have deeper water in front of the seawalls during storms. That deeper water allows larger waves to impact the walls. When we have larger waves, we have more wave overtopping, and more wave overtopping results in increased damage to the public and private properties behind the seawalls. That's private homes, that's public infrastructure like roads, utilities, And it also affects the ability of the towns to provide public services during storms when they need to, send that emergency response vehicle out to help the public, and they can't get there because of wave overtopping and flooding and damage. I wanted to talk just for a second about the current management approach. So the towns have been working hard to manage these shoreline problems. Both towns have active programs with staff that are dedicated to maintaining the structures along the shoreline. They're ensuring public safety during storms and planning for future needs. So the towns have been maintaining and repairing these shore protection structures. They've also have programs to elevate or buy out structures. They've also been regulating development in these high hazard areas, and they've been engaging in planning studies, much like the one we're doing right now, through the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program that the state runs, and also through the CZM Coastal Resiliency Grant Program. So all these steps are aimed at minimizing flooding during storms and reducing wave damages to buildings and public infrastructure. But the damages that are occurring are going to continue into the future as sea level rises and storms become more frequent and intense. So we really need additional measures to add resiliency to both of these towns. So we can continue with this current management approach, but this beach and dune nourishment is intended to augment the current management approach in order to reduce damage and reduce vulnerability. And this last slide here for the intro portion just sort of shows, how much money is going to be needed over the next 30 years in order to continue to repair damaged properties through FEMA repetitive loss claims, repair seawalls, and provide public services during storms. So it's estimated that Marshfield will have to pay upwards of $71 million to protect these properties over the next 30 years, and Duxbury about $26.4 million. So that's a significant amount of money that we hope to be able to reduce by implementing these beach and dune nourishment projects. All right. So during the FY20 CZM grant, we evaluated the coastlines of both towns. And we evaluated those to identify sites where beach and dune nourishment would be feasible. And we used engineering judgment to assess the viability of beach nourishment at each site. We looked at 14 different beaches all the way along the coastline. We took into account engineering feasibility, performance, and long-term performance of the projects, potential environmental impacts, and costs. And after doing that exercise or that analysis, we ended up identifying 2 areas for dune nourishment. So that's Rexhame Public Beach up here and Winslow Ave Beach here. So there's 2 blue areas identified for dune nourishment, and the 2 red areas, so Fieldston and Sunrise Beaches here in Marshfield, and then Bay Ave and Gurnet Rd Beaches, partly in Marshfield and partly in Duxbury. Those are the 2 sites we identified as being feasible in order to perform beach and dune nourishment. At each of these sites, we looked at a range of alternatives for dune and or beach nourishment. We went through an analysis to select a preferred alternative. I'm not going to spend any time tonight talking about how we narrowed down the designs to the preferred alternative. Instead, I'm just going to jump to the preferred alternative and describe to you what it is we're moving forward with into the permitting process for each of these sites. So at Rexhame Public Beach, that's what we're looking at here. This slide shows what's planned for Rexhame Public Beach. It's a dune nourishment project to enhance the elevation and width of the existing dunes. So the footprint of the project is shown by this yellow area here. The design covers about 5.3 acres of dune and beach, would require about 47,000 cubic yards of fine to medium grain sand, similar to what's there right now. It would take place entirely on Town of Marshfield property. And if the Sea Rivers Trust is interested in participating, that would be a benefit to the project. And so the town is going to be engaging in discussions with Sea Rivers Trust to see if they would like to participate. The benefits of this particular project at Rexhame Public Beach are improved storm damage protection, improved habitat for shorebirds, and improved recreation. And then this is just a cross section of the design at Rexhame. So, and I have one of these for each of the locations. So I'm going to describe what these graphs mean once, and then hopefully we can move through them more quickly. But this is distance along the shoreline. So we're starting in the parking lot over here, and we're moving out into the ocean in this direction here to the right. And the y-axis is elevation. So 0 is, I mean, you can think of it as sea level, mean sea level. And so the black line is the existing profile through Rexhame Beach, and the orange or yellow line is the proposed dune nourishment. You can see that the proposed project would increase the elevation of the dune from 26 to 28 feet elevation. There's a width of the dune of 30 feet at the top, and then the dune would slope at 1 horizontal to 5 vertical grade down to the existing beach. Cost for something like this would be around 1.6 million. Winslow Ave Beach is the next one that we looked at. This also is a dune nourishment project. And the intent would be to enhance the elevation and width of the existing dunes. Here again, the footprint is shown in yellow on this slide. The project covers about 4.5 acres of dune and beach and would require about 18,000 cubic yards of cobble and gravel size sediment that would match what's already in the dunes there. And it would take place entirely on Town of Marshfield property. The benefits of the project here are storm damage protection. Here's an example of the cross section. You can see that we would be increasing the elevation of the dune from elevation 15 to 17 with a dune crest of about 40 feet. So we're increasing the width of the dune here. The cost for this project would be about $540,000. Next beaches are Fieldston and Sunrise. Fieldston and Sunrise is a combined dune and beach nourishment design. So it increased the elevation and width of the current beach. Again, the footprint is shown by this yellow shape here in the slide. This project covers 30.5 acres, 30.5 acres of beach along approximately 5,600 feet of shoreline. It would require 390,000 cubic yards of sand mixed with some gravel and cobble, again, to match what's already on the beach. It would impact 66 private properties and 1 Town of Marshfield property, all seaward of the seawall, so all on the ocean side of the seawall. It won't impact any of the properties behind this, portions of the property behind the seawall. It's all on the beach side. Here's a cross section of the Sunrise and Fieldston and Sunrise design. So it includes a 30-foot wide dune at elevation 13 in front of the seawall. It includes a 90-foot wide beach at elevation 9. And then that beach would slope down at 1 vertical to 12 horizontal to the existing grade. This particular project, I don't know if you can see, but this line right here is high tide, mean high water. If you extend it all the way over to the existing beach, you're almost at the face of the seawall. So with this project here, we'd be making the beach wider by about 165 feet. And this part of the beach would be about 5.5 feet higher than it currently is. Cost for something like this would be around $11.6 million. Okay, and then the last place we looked at or found feasible for beach and dune nourishment is the Bay Ave and Gurnet Rd Beaches. So again, this is a dune and beach nourishment design that would increase the elevation and width of the existing beach. The footprint is shown by this yellow shape on the slide. This particular design covers 50.3 acres of beach along about 6,100 feet of shoreline and would require approximately 500,000 cubic yards of sand, again, mixed with some gravel and cobble to match what's on the beach now. This particular project or this footprint will impact 22 private properties in Marshfield up here and 65 private properties in Duxbury. Again, all of those impacts are on the ocean side of the existing seawalls. There is one section of this coast I will mention that doesn't have a seawall, that's got a dune. In that area, we would bring some of that material back into that dune and enhance that dune and blend it in with the beach nourishment design on either side. Benefits of this particular project are storm damage prevention, reduced wave overtopping, improved habitat for shorebirds, and improved recreation. The cross section for the Bay Ave Gurnet Rd Beach is shown here. We have a 20-foot wide dune right in front of the seawall at elevation 11. We've got an 85-foot wide beach at elevation 8 with a 1 vertical to 20 horizontal slope down to natural grade. This particular design creates a beach that's 190 feet wider than what exists there now and 4 feet higher than what exists now. Cost for a project like this would be about $14.8 million. So now getting into the property ownership topics. So we are proposing nourishment on private properties, as I said, at the northern end of Rexhame Public Beach, in Fieldston and Sunrise Beaches, 66 parcels altogether, and in Bay Ave and Gurnet Rd Beaches, 22 parcels in Marshfield and 65 in Duxbury. The projects do require that we receive access easements for the public to pass in these areas that have been nourished. Because we are using public monies to fund these projects, that brings with it a requirement that we get these easements. The towns have both sent out letters to the affected property owners recently and requesting them to sign the easements and send them back to the towns. What else was I going to say? So the towns have really made a decision to go ahead and pursue getting these easements signed as a first step. In the event that we can't get everyone to sign these easements, there are other avenues that the towns can pursue, and I'm sure the attorneys will be ready to answer questions about what that might be if the public is interested. As far as next steps go, in addition to this public engagement and public outreach part of the grant, we're also securing permits for the work. So we were scoped through the MEPA process to prepare an environmental impact report for the project. So we are in the process of developing that right now. Expect to file that probably late February, early March. We will then also need to get orders of conditions from the Marshfield and Duxbury Conservation Commissions. We'll need to get permits from Mass DEP Waterways, a Chapter 91 permit and a Chapter 91 permit, no water quality certificate required for this. We'll need consistency certification from Mass Coastal Zone Management and a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. So we expect to have all those permits filed by the end of 2021 and to receive those permits by mid-2022. At that point, then the towns would be seeking funding for construction of the projects, either through grants or other mechanisms that the towns have for securing funding for large projects. Once that's been secured, then we'd be ready to go to construction. I think the earliest possible time we'd see construction would be during the winter of 2023. Okay, that's it for the discussion. I think that maybe Rebecca from Coastal Zone Management wanted to have something or wanted to speak up a little bit, and then I think the attorneys have something to say about the easements.
Thank you, Leslie. It was an excellent presentation. So again, my name is Rebecca Haney. I'm with the Office of Coastal Zone Management, and we are funding this project. So we funded the design analysis and working on the permitting. We do get a lot of requests from both communities as well as private property owners for funding for shore protection projects. There is limited funding available and it is competitive both at the state level and the federal level. Right now, the eligibility is for public projects. In this case, because you have publicly owned seawalls that are maintained by the communities, then protection of those walls or enhancement of the protection of those walls and restoring the beach in front of it is something that's covered. So nourishing that beach makes a big difference in how the seawall is able to perform and extends the life of the wall. So that is something that's an eligible project. But there are very limited circumstances where protection for private properties is eligible. So that's something that's important to consider. It's a significant benefit that you're able to possibly get some public funds that will benefit your shore protection. So I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. So Bob and Sharon, do you have anything you want to say about the easements, or do you want to just take questions? I don't know how
Maybe
you guys
just
want to proceed.
a couple of words about the easements.
Okay,
Residents in Marshfield and Duxbury have received a letter and a draft easement. The easement is requested from you because we need the right to enter your property, which is privately owned, to perform the beach nourishment project that Leslie has very adequately described. Hopefully you see the value in that. But because public funds are being expended, the state and federal government will ask us to be able to confirm that the public as a whole has a right to walk across it. Now, that doesn't mean that the public has a right to walk across the entirety of your property, but the public will be asked to be given the right to walk across the beach portion of your property where the nourishment area is occurring. So for most people, that's just like what happens today, except when the work is completed, it'll be working in a more extended beach area, which will probably take people away from close to the seawalls or close to the homes where there are no seawalls and place them or give them more room to walk further away from private homes and things of that nature. Under no circumstances would either of the towns be looking to acquire rights from you that would give people the right to cross the upland portions of your property. It's only the beach area. And if we're not able to get them, it impacts the project. It creates an issue for the towns to decide. And the issue is, to the towns, in order to make this happen and really protect your properties, do we seek authorization at town meeting to do an easement taking? And that is an option that the selectmen in both towns will have to decide whether they'll do. We think that there's tremendous value, particularly where the money doesn't necessarily come out of your pockets in a very direct way, to having these easements given to us so that we don't have to take them. Hopefully you'll see the value in that. And if we can do it here, and there's other aspects in the other areas of town in the future that it works, we think this is a really good model. The questions I think both Sharon and I have received are, what happens if everybody doesn't give an easement? Well, if everybody doesn't give an easement, we'll then be faced with the question, should we take an easement on the other properties? And if we have to, we'll consider that, and that requires a town meeting vote. So it's the registered voters of Marshfield and Duxbury that'll ultimately decide whether to do that. But we really do think that we're making a very significant public benefit to everybody. It'll hopefully diminish the expense that you'll sometime in the future incur repairing your property. And that's why we're asking you voluntarily to do it and help us out, because really all you're doing is helping yourselves when you grant the easement.
And if I can just chime in on the Duxbury side, the easements are, as Bob just said, the ability of the town to come onto your property to do the work. And as you saw from Leslie's slide, the work is not going to be done until 2023 or whenever the funding is ready. So it's an investment that you make now for future work that the towns will do when all the funding is secured. For Duxbury residents, this is different. This is a little different from the seawall easement, because if you recall, the seawall easement in Duxbury goes all the way also on the landward side of the seawall. So it comes closer to your house and then extends 30 feet from the seawall on towards the ocean. This project is only going to involve easements on property that's seaward of the seawall. So it's not going to come onto your property at all. And since the beach is going to be widened, as Leslie said, most likely people who are walking on the beach close to your house right now will be walking further away from it. And, the easements, of course, are they're required for the public benefit and for the public funding. As you've seen, this project is going to take millions and millions and millions of dollars. And since public funds are being expended, the state agencies are saying that, these dunes are going to protect your property, but they will also give a chance to residents to enjoy the beach, and most likely, as we think, they're further away from your property. So the towns really hope that you will agree to these easements. They're for your benefit, for everybody's benefit. And if you have any further questions, and a question was asked whether you can maintain your stairs. I don't know where the stairs are located, but if the beach nourishment project, extends the beach further, makes it wider, you can move your stairs. Where possible, you can keep your stairs. We're not intending to interfere with your use of the beach. It's only improvements that interfere with the project itself. So I hope this is some information for you to consider. Thank you.
I think I'll probably just add to what Shrin just indicated. And if for some reason the project doesn't go forward, it would be possible for the towns to release those easements. And the other question that I saw was, what would it allow people to basically camp out on your beach? The only aspect of what we're looking to receive is the ability for foot traffic to pass across your beach. It's not an easement to allow people to use the beach for other purposes. It's only for foot passage, walking across the beach.
Okay, if I may, we've gotten a bunch of questions just in the last couple of minutes here. And
Val, I sort of cataloged them. Might be able
Great.
to answer a few of them.
could you?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go from most recent to project. Will the project include dune fencing and seagrass to sustain these enrichments? And what about boardwalks to limit damage to enhanced dunes? So we're not talking about boardwalks right now. It's possible up at Rexhame that the town may in the future decide to add some sort of a dune walkover up and over the dune, but right now we were not planning to do that. Nor are we planning to add any sort of beach grass except for on the dune crest and the landward part of the dune. So that is an area up at Rexham Public Beach where there are endangered shorebirds, and in some cases the Natural Heritage Program is not in favor of planting seagrass because that takes away from the shorebird habitat. So right now we're only proposing to plant from the crest landward on the dunes. As far as do the easements allow the public to pass say from the roads, across their property down to the beach? No. There are established, I guess, rights of way for the public to get to the beach in both towns, and those will remain in place. But the easements do not allow the public to pass across your property landward of the seawall. There were a couple of questions about longevity of the beach nourishment, and that's a good question. If we're able to build the projects to completion, so in other words, do the entire nourishment at both Fieldston and Sunrise and Bay Ave and Gurnet Road, which are long beach nourishment projects. If the towns have enough money and the source of material to build those long projects, it's expected that they would require renourishment in about 4 to 5 years initially. That doesn't mean that every single grain of sand is lost. It means that we've got about 50% of the material that's left in the footprint that we originally established. At that point, we would recommend going ahead and renourishing. And if you keep up with a program like that, that requirement for the renourishment interval, it increases. So the first time you might need to nourish the beach after 5 years. If you do it again, maybe it's 6 years, then 8 years, then 10 years. So it's not, shouldn't be considered as a permanent fix. And the beach nourishment does have to be maintained over time. So that's an important expectation to understand or to have.
Leslie, this is Jason. You had done a very thorough and an informative job of speaking to the longevity issues in some of the previous presentations, which were on the Town of Duxbury website. Would it be worth directing people to those presentations if they're interested in getting more information on that issue?
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Are those presentations still up on the website, Val? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, also there are links to the YouTube where you can watch Leslie's previous presentations, which contain some of this information. And, you know, we started the outreach back last summer, and we've done 2 previous outreach meetings that are available to watch on YouTube, as well as all of the information that Leslie has provided to the town as far as what we filed with MIPA is available. It's a 300-page document. So it might not be easy to look at online, but it's, you know, if you have any trouble, we can send you a copy.
I think the most complete presentation is the one we gave in August of 2020. So
Yeah,
if you go to the website, you can look at that.
there's a
There's an-
direct link to YouTube there.
There's another question about, is there any advantage to pump sand via barge from off the shoreline? This process is used in Florida. And that's certainly an option in this case. So that would mean that we would be pumping the material from either an offshore borrow site or from a nearby dredging project. And that's certainly a possibility. It's important to keep in mind, though, that we're just permitting at this stage the nourishment area, the placement area. We wouldn't be permitting that dredging project, or we're not permitting an offshore borrow site right now. But we could certainly receive material from those 2 kinds of projects if they were permitted. And that's a very good source of material for the beach. There was a question about the stairs. I think Sharon answered that. How the Duxbury easements vary from the ones they signed from the seawall. Sharon answered that. Are surveyed areas where they need access, or will it be all homes along Fieldston? I'm not sure I understand that question. If that was your question, if you want to expand on it, maybe I can answer that. There was a
Leslie, they
question.
may be asking where we're getting access for the equipment.
Okay. All right. So we have that shown on the plans. Let's, oh gosh, I'm not going to remember the road names.
In
The
Duxbury,
plans are also on the website.
yeah,
Yeah.
in Duxbury, it's Gurnet Road. In Marshfield, it's Bay Ave and Bay Road. In Wrexham, it is, I forgot the street name there.
Old Beach Road and Wrexham Road.
Okay, Old Beach Road and Wrexham Road. And then there are some public accesses off of Foster Ave in the Fieldston area.
All right. Thanks for recalling those. So that's the location where the equipment would enter the beach from the upland. And then there's another question here about how easements would apply to dune properties. So is public access required on the beach seaward of the dunes, like seawall parcels, or is public access allowed on entire dune parcels? Which is a good question. I hadn't
Well-
actually thought of that.
Leslie,
Leslie,
have-
go ahead, Val. I don't mean to. Go ahead.
sorry, so Sharon and I had talked, and I've shared this with, I think, all of the dune property owners today. In Duxbury, I believe that's the only location where we have an existing dune that we're talking about. And
On private property.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
And in that situation, we realized, because someone called us a few weeks ago on this, that there's no maintenance agreement, like the easement stretches along the seawall and it stops with the seawall. And the dune's kind of there, and what we mailed out didn't define where we meant. And so what our intention is to take that 39-foot wide maintenance easement that we have running along on both sides of the dune and just extend it in a straight line across those 5 dune parcels and say from there and seaward is where we're talking about. Nothing past where those walls are on either side would be affected by the easement. That's private property.
All right, let me see if I can get some of these other questions. All
There's a question about liability.
right, why don't you take that one?
Well, public property, when it's allowed to be used free of charge, has the protection of a recreational use statute. So it's not likely that the towns would necessarily bear any liability associated with the ordinary foot passage that would occur if somebody was injured as a result of that. Right now, people are walking up and down most portions of the beaches, both in Marshfield and Duxbury, probably at low tide, because at high tide, there's probably not much room to walk in some portions of these beaches. And I haven't heard of any stories of persons that are suing private property owners because someone tripped on the beach and got injured. Again, I just don't see this liability as being a major issue for anybody here.
And also that, Bob, the protections of the recreation use statute apply not only to governments, but also to private property owners.
Mhm.
So that if you're a private property owner and you allow members of the public to use portions of your property for recreation purposes, which is what this would be, the statute protects, in Massachusetts, they protect property owners from liability for ordinary negligence. So you'd have to be, unless you're really reckless and intentionally digging trenches, or water traps, I think that statute, it provides protection from liability, and I recommend that you review that.
Mhm.
I see a question here, a couple of them about whether or not the towns will be adding more public access points to the beaches once they're nourished. I don't think that's the case. It's not something we've talked about with the towns. I don't think that's the case. I think there are already public access points at all the possible locations there can be, but maybe the attorneys or Greg or Val could chime in on that.
I know that there are multiple points of public access in Marshfield, and I know there are some that are very close to the Duxbury line. So I don't think this is envisioned as creating any new public access points at all, including for how the equipment would access the beach, because there's ample area to do that.
I think the same is true of Duxbury. The beach is there to protect, mostly the property. And however people get access to the beach, they'll continue to do so.
Yeah, there is no, as far as I know, in Duxbury, the beach is entirely private. And I'm not sure if everyone's clear on this. The Duxbury Beach Reservation owns the beach, not the town of Duxbury. That's
Mhm.
private. And what we do is we lease it from them on an annual basis.
Correct.
So we have an agreement on how we can use that beach by the public only through an agreement that's signed and renewed on a regular basis. we are not creating any new public access, and we're not intending to create any new parking in either town. We touched on that earlier. A question keeps coming up is whether or not people can linger on the beach rather than just walk along the beach. Could the attorneys speak to that?
Well, these easements do not create additional rights to use the beach area for general beach purposes. All that it authorizes is people to walk across the beach on foot. And it's literally just that, plus the beach nourishment. If people have been using the beach, which is your property, for more than 20 years, you might find it very difficult to stop them anyways. But all we're looking to do is to gain the public's confirmed right to walk across your property in the area of the beach nourishment.
Correct.
There's another question here that the easements will still, if they sign the easements, it will still allow town residents to go to the beach. Is that correct? And yes, it is correct. The town will still have the right to be town residents going to the beach.
Okay, and I see a question here. The reservation does not own in front of the homes. Right, that's because the homes own the beaches in front of their homes on the Gurnet Road and Ocean Road homes in Duxbury. So that's why we're reaching out for easements.
Leslie, there's a question about funding sources. You want to talk about those?
Yeah, sure. So the question about where's the money for renourishment come from? So there are grant programs through CZM and through the state and even through the federal government that could pay for a portion of these projects. And we would certainly be available to help the towns apply for those grant opportunities, you know, when they're ready to do that. I don't know what other avenues specifically the town has. And maybe Michael could speak about that, or somebody like town meeting article or something. I don't know what else you could do to secure additional funds, but
Leslie, perhaps you could say a couple words about beneficial reuse of the Green Harbor dredging material for maintenance.
good. That's really good. Forgot about that. So every year we did one CZM project probably 3 or 4 years ago, looking at whether or not we could beneficially reuse that material that's dredged from Green Harbor for nourishing the nearby beaches. We know that material is coming from the nearby beaches and we'd like to be able to get it back onto the beach. Right now, the Corps of Engineers maintains that channel every year and removes anywhere from 25 to 35,000 cubic yards of material. And they take it, because of the equipment they have, it doesn't allow them to get it back on the beach. They dump it offshore, sort of in the nearshore area, sort of right around the Duxbury Marshfield town line. And it would really be what we decided in that previous grant was that it would provide a huge benefit if we could find a way to get that material onto the beach. So with these permits in place, the towns will now be in a position to be able to work with the Corps of Engineers to get that the material placed onto the beach annually, whether it's pumped there or brought there mechanically. We're not quite sure what the mechanisms would be. Both are possible, but that's a huge source of material that would be very low cost for the towns, because the Corps is required to maintain that channel, and they pull that material out each year. So that would be a terrific source of material at low cost for the towns.
Leslie, I could just weigh in. So the other option for towns, at least I'm speaking for Marshfield, you could go the debt exclusion. You know, you'd have to get town meeting vote to go along with that, and town meeting vote for a debt exclusion would want to see that balanced out with some grant money. So that would be another option.
Thanks, Michael. So there's a question here about the beach shutting down for most of the summer because of birds. How will this affect us if the federal government puts funds into this? Regardless of whether or not the federal government or the state or the towns fund this project themselves, we will be creating additional bird habitat, which is a benefit of the project. And because of that, the towns are going to be required to monitor these beaches for birds. If we do find through that process that there are birds nesting in these areas, these newly nourished areas, they are going to have to be protected. And so the public would not be able to go in those areas. There'll be fencing that sort of protects the birds while the nests are there and while the chicks fledge. So it's a benefit to the birds and to the bird habitat, but we will have to manage it if the birds show up and start using it.
There was a question about why we're not using riprap.
I saw that question in relation to like Gurnet or in relation to Brant Rock. Is that the one you're talking about?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Val, I think it was in relation to a seawall design, a previous project.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I didn't see that question.
Scrolling to find it.
The question is there a plan for armoring to be upgraded in front of Brant Rock since it was not on this project and overtops? We did look at that in the previous grant last year. So we looked at all the beaches, as I said. Brant Rock was not prioritized or not found feasible for beach nourishment for a number of reasons. I'd encourage you to go back to that PowerPoint presentation and to the other material we provided to look at the other alternatives we suggested for that area. So again, we looked at it, ruled out beach nourishment for that area, looked at some other alternatives, and left that material with the towns to further sort of evaluate what they're going to do with those areas. But beach nourishment is not a viable alternative for Brant Rock for providing resiliency.
I found the other question, Leslie. It's when proposals for the new seawall were discussed, there was also talk of riprap to protect the wall. Please explain why this is a less desirable way to protect the beach.
The riprap would be a less desirable option. You think that's what they're saying?
They're asking why that's a less desirable option.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, basically these beaches are sediment starved. They have sort of a real lack of sediment on them. And that's because the beaches have been up and down the shoreline for such a distance have been armored. So all the natural sources of sediment that normally feed a beach throughout the year are removed from this system. So it can't be replenished. And so that's the reason why we want to bring in and replenish the beaches is to add more material to the system so it can act more naturally, and so that sand can protect those seawalls and revetments that are the last line of defense for the homes and private and public properties. If we just add riprap in front of the seawalls in Duxbury, that's going to do nothing to address the sediment deficit problem, and we're still going to have lowering of the beach. We're still going to have large waves during storms crashing on the seawall and the riprap, and we're still going to have overtopping. So that's why we need this sand out in front of those seawalls to buffer the seawalls, to protect the seawalls and the properties behind them, and to sort of move the effects of the waves further offshore during storms.
Another question is coming up here about stairs. I think we addressed that, right? Whether the stairs are not related. One question came up that I'm typing a response to, but in this case, there's another one. People who don't have the new wall yet in Duxbury. So some people have the new taller wall, other folks have the shorter existing wall. They were wondering what the elevation change is for those areas between the nourishment and the existing wall.
So I'm just looking at the cross section here. I would say, so the dune itself is proposed to be at elevation 11 there, and it looks like the top of the seawall is about 16. Do you know exactly what it is, Val, or? Okay.
No.
So I'm going to say it's about a 5-foot drop down to the crest of the dune.
Okay, I'm just pointing, someone asked me a question privately. I'm just gonna share the answer to everyone. The question was, can Duxbury Beach Reservation benefit from these other sources of nourishment that we talked about, like harbor dredging and things like that? Yes, if they permit it, if they go through these processes like we're doing, and I think they are working with the Woods Hole Group completely separately from this project. This is not the Duxbury Beach Reservations project. The town is also doing a project for the private property that is not the Duxbury Beach Reservation. So there's two separate projects going on in Duxbury, but they're very similar, and we're using the same consultant, and we have the same funding from Coastal Zone Management, different grants though. So Marshfield and Duxbury are partnering on the public projects because of the public seawalls. And the Duxbury Beach Reservation has no seawalls and is working on private nourishment in order to maintain that barrier beach, which protects the harbor and also is a place for the birds and for everyone to recreate.
I saw a question, and maybe this one's for Leslie, but I think it was asked by someone from Ocean Bluff, is there any benefit to them, even though their properties are not slated for the nourishment, if nourishment occurs elsewhere? And, you know, Leslie, I don't know, you, in your other presentation that I was fortunate to attend, you talked about how sand migrates up and down the beach, and I don't know whether there's any benefit to any other areas, but I assume that sand will continue to migrate as it has been doing for as many years as there's been beaches. So can you comment on whether there'd be any benefit to that Ocean Bluff area?
Yeah, that's a good question. There will continue to be longshore sediment transport up and down this beach, and it goes both directions depending on, direction of waves and winds. We do know that in the Ocean Bluff area, that's an area of sort of divergence of sediment transport. So sediment moves to the south and to the north, and that's one reason why that area is so critically eroded. I would not expect a lot of the material from Fieldston and Sunrise to make it to the Ocean Bluff area. Some will, and you may see some buildup of material right along the toe of that revetment in the Ocean Bluff area, but I would not expect it to be a significant quantity of material. I will say that as a part of this, developing this environmental impact report, we are going to be developing model data that will quantify the volumes of material going in those directions. So I will have more information, more quantitative information to answer that question in the next couple of months.
I'd like to step in on a question we're getting. A couple of questions I think are kind of leading me into the clarification again. In Duxbury, the town of Duxbury has, through the process of going through those repairs on the seawall, is still looking for funding to continue those repairs. What we did is we repaired what broke. We know that we need to reconstruct the remainder of the wall because of the changes in storm damage and better design. It's been a long time. The beach has changed from when those original walls were built and so forth. The reason we're talking about nourishment is because we're using public money to reconstruct that seawall. And in order to do that, we need to use the most possible bang for the buck. And so in order to do any further work where the walls are still standing, we need to also incorporate nourishment into the process of the reconstruction because our permits demand that. And it's also the best use of public funds. When Leslie went through her PowerPoint presentation at the beginning, we were talking about the lifespan and the costs and so forth. And this project will significantly increase the lifespan of the wall. And furthermore, and much more important, it will really, really cut back on the amount of cobbles and sand that overtop the wall. there, you will see a huge reduction in the amount of storm damage that you experience during the time that we have that nourishment in place. It's a tremendous benefit to you and to us as a town in terms of response. We won't have to move rocks to get to you if there's a problem. You know, from the 2018 storms that we stood on those walls and we did everything we could to keep your houses standing throughout those storms. And we will do our level best to continue to protect you. One of the things we can do right now is work with you to do the beach nourishment to cut down on the amount of damage that you're experiencing and to protect the walls.
Leslie and Rebecca, there's a couple of questions that are kind of asking two questions about how long will the beaches be closed while we're renourishing? And on Leslie's side, that's the question. And on Rebecca's side, there's timing. We're not going to be able to do this in the middle of the summer and stuff. There's limited time windows for this work. So if you guys could provide a little information for those questions.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. The permits that we received for this will specify when the work can be done and maybe more importantly, when it can't be done. They will not allow it to be done during the bird nesting season. So this will start April 1st and it will go through August 31st. We will not be able to do any sort of work on the beach during that time period. If the material is being supplied from a dredging project, there will be other time of year restrictions that would have to be adhered to. And that would probably be really in the dead of winter, say from November 1 to January 15th. And that might be the only sort of narrow window that we could provide sand to the beach from a dredging project in order to protect other species. So I would expect that if we were to do one of these projects and do it in its entirety, so the whole 6,100 feet, it would take, 3 or 4 months to get this project done.
Leslie, I think that, and Greg, the other important thing to think about is what Woods Hole Group is designed is a template for nourishment, but you need a certain amount of volume to fill that. And they're looking at different potential sources of sediment that may become available. So for example, if you have some of the Green Harbor dredging material that is available, that is a small amount relative to the template. So it's not going to fill it, but it's going to add some material. It's not going to be the entire template that she's described. So if that, taking what's available for a relatively low cost is a project of opportunity to use compatible material and add your sediment, then that's important to go ahead with. That does help your system, but it may not add the entire volume for the whole project.
Leslie, there was another question asked, and the question was, what happens if all the residents of one town give permission, but the other residents of the other town do not? Will that impact the project? And the only place I think that would be true would be in that Green Harbor, Duxbury Beach area. The other parts are wholly in Marshfield and wouldn't be connected. So I guess that could proceed regardless of what somebody else felt somewhere else. But can you answer that question on that Duxbury Beach, Green Harbor Beach area?
Yeah, sure. Ideally, we want easements from everyone in each of the footprints. If we have someone in the middle who doesn't sign the easement, it jeopardizes the entire project for that area, because we can't build a project and skip just one property or two properties, or skip one here and then build on 5 properties and then skip on down the beach and skip a few more properties. It's got to be a contiguous project. So if one person decides, or 2 people decides they don't want to sign the easement, then I think the towns would have to consider other means for proceeding with the project.
Why don't we put something out in the bay? rather
Oh.
than nourish.
One of those wave attenuation devices, Leslie, I think that's the question. Why don't we use those?
Yeah, we did look at some alternatives that, like that in the previous studies, so I would encourage you to go look at that information, to, learn a little bit more about it. I guess the one thing I can say is that, an offshore breakwater, it might reduce the wave energy that's coming to the beach, but it's not going to create sand for your beach. So if you're going to have an offshore breakwater to minimize erosion, you first got to have sand on the beach. So, if you're ever going to do something like that, which is a very costly endeavor and something very difficult to permit, it would need to be coupled with beach nourishment.
The other thing I would add to that is that wave attenuation devices have to be pretty large to provide protection when you have a tide range as large as yours. And that makes them more costly. And as Leslie mentioned, one of the issues or the reasons why you're having some of the storm damage is because of lack of sediment in the system. And so the wave attenuation device doesn't solve that problem. You need to add compatible sediment to the system to address the sediment starvation.
There was a question about someone who, I guess in that section in the Duxbury area where there isn't a seawall and they have dunes, they're uncomfortable signing the easements until they can get more information on the design. Completely understand that. We're working on the design and we'll have that in the next couple of months. So, as soon as we have something, we'll make sure that we give it to Val and she can provide it to you.
Will current access to the beach remain as is? Yes.
Yes.
Nothing's changing about access to the beach, either more or less. Nothing's changing there. The question about being able to cross, I think they mean private dunes in order to get to the beach. The answer is no. We're not providing any additional access. We're only looking for easements where the nourishment would take place, which is on the shore side of the seawall, or if you're talking about where there's a dune, we're talking about the shore side from, if you stood arm to arm and pointed at those walls, only from there towards the ocean. The rest of those dunes stay private.
There's a good question here about, how much truck traffic there would be. That's a really good question. The most truck traffic would occur if we're trucking this material in from the upland. We haven't yet quantified how many trucks it would take, but I can certainly do that, and we can post that up on the town's website as a sort of answers to frequently asked questions. But without giving you a number, I would say that it would be a significant number of truck trips to bring in, this quantity of material. So that's certainly something to consider.
Okay, we have a repetitive question, and I think because it's come up several times, I'm going to repeat the answer. People are concerned about us not moving forward and what happens to those easements. We've had that question raised a few times, and just to be clear, at some point, if we're not doing this work, the towns have the option to abandon those easements. Our intention, because we want to improve the walls and protect the walls and protect the homes behind the walls, is to move forward with nourishment as well as wall reconstruction in all, in both towns as we move forward. And we need to do both to keep the lifespan of the wall going forward. So if for some reason we were not doing that, we can certainly consider abandoning the easements at that time. We had a question about whether placing sand more frequently would be cheaper and easier.
Yeah, I saw that. Not quite sure how to answer that, but I think, well, one thing we do know is that with repeated, and we've done some modeling to show this, with repeated nourishment, say, for example, from the Green Harbor project, if we can do that every year, that really increases the longevity of the project. And so that's a good thing. And in that case, we would have that source of material to do every year. I don't know that the towns would be in a position to fund nourishment every year or to sustain that sort of truck traffic that I was talking about if we're doing an upland placement. So that might be something to consider, you know. So
Leslie,
yeah.
do you think we could put up a beach profile picture? Because I think there's some, I think it would be helpful to walk back through just a beach profile of where the nourishment looks like compared to the existing beach.
So you think it like Bay Ave?
Yeah, if you could,
Leslie, Leslie, this is Jason. Perhaps with regards to that previous question, if you could speak to the size of a beach fill project in relationship to its longevity, and the larger the beach fill project, the longer the longevity. But I don't believe that's a linear relationship, that it's an exponential relationship. Perhaps if you could speak to that within the context of that question.
Yeah, so that's a really good point too. So as Jason said, the longevity, the performance of a beach nourishment project is proportional to the length. So the longer you build that project, the longer it's going to last. It's not a linear relationship, as he said, it's exponential. But if we do, say, small nourishments every year along the beach, there'll be a benefit. I don't want you to understand that there's not a benefit, because there will be. Anytime we can put sediment in the system, there's going to be a benefit. But if we're to do smaller projects annually, you're going to have sort of a shorter, you're not going to, you wouldn't expect to see that 4 or 5 year lifetime that I talked about before half the material is gone. So I don't know, I hope that speaks to the
I think
point you wanted me to speak to.
the other way to explain it is that the material spreads out. So it's not that the material goes away, that you have the sediment that you've added to the system spreads out, moves along shore, and is part of the system. So some of the benefits that Duxbury Beach Reservation has seen from nourishing their dune yearly on a regular basis has helped build up their system. Doing that kind of regular nourishment with material from Green Harbor on your beaches, it may spread out and not stay in the same place it was put for a design life, like what Leslie's showing you, but it still benefits the system, which helps all of you.
and if I can add to that, the one person is having a hard time, and I'm sure others are too, understanding. So right now, people, you can't see my cursor, can you?
No.
No. Okay, so people now will go out to the beach and they'll sit in front of the wall and hang out. And the question is, how does that change? Will they have to walk over a dune? And the nourishment, if you look at the shape of this, the nourishment's just going to change the shape of the beach. It's not a dune that is going to be like starting at the bottom of the wall and then going up into the air and then back down. What it's going to do is it's going to come up against the wall. So you'll be next to the wall, but higher up in terms of where you are now. You'll be higher up on the wall when you hang out by the wall. So you're not having to go up and over a dune to get to the beach. If you look at this, the beach will just, the water is going to be higher and it's going to be less steep on the beach. And that's a more user-friendly environment in terms of having, I mean, it's a little bit smaller of a beach, but it's not a steep drop to the wall. So I hope that helps visualize it a little bit.
Yeah, another way to look at it is, I mean, if you extend this line right here, which is high tide, all the way over to the existing profile. So at high tide, if people are on the beach, they're right up here next to the wall, okay? They are, 10 feet below the crest of the wall, but they're right up next to the wall. If this project is built this way and people are out there on the beach and they want to be near the water's edge, they're going to be, 100 and 200 feet away from the wall, further away from the wall than where they are now. They're going to be 200 feet from the wall. And this, Val's right, this little dune here, it does abut the seawall. So when people enter the beach, they'll walk across the dune and then, down the face of the dune and then across the beach.
Another question has just come in, which is why can we refer people back to why Brant Rock and Ocean Bluff are not suitable for beach nourishment? And that would be back to the report that we've presented in the past. I think the August presentation covered pretty well the choices that we're making. And if you go to the town of Plymouth's, that's my old job, town of Duxbury's planning department website, Duxbury's planning department website, on the left, there's a tab for this beach nourishment project. And if you go into that page, there's a link where you can watch that presentation. You can look at the PowerPoint slides. It has to do with the types of materials that are under the water out in the ocean that limit the ability for the nourishment to really be effective. And that's particularly the reason why we're trying to focus on the areas where we do know it will have an impact.
There's a question here about, can we add anything, incorporate anything in the project to minimize loss of material during storms, like groins or fencing or something like that? It's a good question. We wouldn't recommend putting in any groins because, and it would be extremely difficult to permit because that's just going to starve downdrift beaches of material that would naturally migrate there. So we need to try to get away from this idea of putting in hard structures and move towards, recognizing that there's a natural flow of sediment up and down the beach. We need to allow that to happen in order for the beach to be as healthy as it can be. There may be the opportunity to put in some sort of fencing to help build the dunes up towards the upper end of the beach. That would have to be worked out, of course, with natural heritage so that we would not interfere with bird nesting habitat. But that's something that we could certainly look at in the future to help build and maintain material, well, to help build the dunes up there.
Comment two here is why would we not try to hold that sand on the beach? And I think it's important to note that so in Marshfield, there's a little bit of it that actually migrates north and would stay in the system. And in Duxbury, we know that the sand will at times be migrating to Duxbury Beach and Saquesh Beach. And let's look at that in the long run as a good thing, because that's a barrier beach. That barrier beach is protecting all of our snug harbor access to the water by breaking all of the open waves that come in from the ocean, by taking those wave action and breaking it. So by having sand available to provide a barrier beach to protect us so that we have a snug harbor and we have a French Memories and we have a place to go and row and enjoy the waterfront, is because we have that barrier beach. So having sand there is a benefit to the entire community. And yes, it's public money. And yes, we don't have all of the ease of trying to tell the beach to stay where it is, which would be ideal. If we could tell that beach, hey, no sand shall migrate from this spot. We have placed it here and you shall stay. We would do that. We would use super glue, but we can't. We really have to kind of really look at the big picture. That's why we're all, doing these studies to make sure we're doing the nourishment in a place where it will last the longest, protect you guys the most by keeping that cobble from coming up through your windows, and keep that wall working as long as possible.
Val, the other point to add to that is that part of the analysis was looking at characterizing the grain size of your beach and what the sediment transport is. So we know what the rates of transport are and where nourishment is most likely to be effective. And by doing the grain size characterization, they can determine what's appropriate to put on your beach. So when Leslie talks about putting a mix of sand, gravel, and cobble out there, that's to make sure that it stays as long as possible. Because if you don't put the right grain size there, it's not very stable and it moves faster. So you want to maximize your investment. That's why the grain size is proposed what it is, to be consistent with what makes sense for your beach.
So
Val,
Yeah.
I've had a couple of emails come in that is similar to the one that you answered. For people who did not get the easement language and you're on the seawall, please email Val or I, and we will get you that get that easement language to you. There's a question about the north side of Bay Ave. That is not involved in this. This is not an area that we're recommending. It runs roughly around 128 Bay Ave South. So when you come down to the old Burke's Beach area, there is a rock field at low tide. It's south of that rock field is where we're talking that the beach nourishment would start. So I hope that helps for people on the north side of Bay Ave, meaning north of Beach Street, that you're not involved in this beach nourishment project at all.
There's a question here about whether or not you can still sit up next to the wall if you choose to. Yes, the answer is yes, you can.
I'm
There's
just, go ahead.
Another question about dunes that have existing trees and greenscape. None of the areas where we're proposing to work have trees on the dunes in the areas where we're working. There might be some existing beach grass and some woody vegetation, Rosa rugosa, beach plum, bayberry, but there's not any areas that have trees. So we wouldn't be impacting any trees.
And in terms of revegetation, Leslie?
Yeah, so I mean, what I had said before, and I think this is still true, and we can look a little bit further into this, but we wouldn't be planting the dunes with beach grass. Possibly up at Rexhame, we would plant the landward side of the dune if we end up putting some material in there, but we wouldn't be planting the dunes down in Fieldston, Sunrise, Bay Ave, and Gurnet Road.
Leslie, on the north side of Bay Ave, they're still asking. So we have that intertidal rocky area, which is one of the reasons why we stopped where we stopped. But there is also a concern if we added any more material further north, closer to the jetty, that only ends up in the mouth of the Green Harbor River anyway, at the entrance. That material seems to go into the harbor.
Yeah, that's correct. So we have had a comment from DEP and the Corps of Engineers that, there's some concern that with certain wave conditions, we do have a northerly transport in this Bay Ave area. And there's a concern that some of that material could end up in the harbor and exacerbate the shoaling problems there. We are looking at ways to mitigate that. I don't have any answers for you yet on what that will be. We had talked about maybe putting some coarser material at the northern end of the Bay Ave beach to minimize the potential for that northerly transport of the sand back into the harbor. We have a couple of other ideas that we're looking at and considering, but we haven't settled on anything yet. But yes, Greg, if we go further with the nourishment to the north, that's just going to make that problem even worse. And that particular beach up to the north is very healthy because that material is trapped up against the jetty. So it's not an area that really needs nourishment.
We've had a few questions come in about whether taxes will increase because of the nourishment. The answer is no, not related to the nourishment, but I do want to be clear, and the town has talked with the Seawall Committee about this, that the possibility of asking the folks who live along that wall being asked to share in some sort of a betterment still remains. That doesn't mean that that would be taxation related to the nourishment, but we may need your help in trying to secure the funding to protect the homes. We are faced with a financial crisis, and it's a problem that we have to work together on. And so I'm not going to say that the betterment is out of the question. That doesn't mean that your property value, though, will increase in terms of taxation. I hope that's clarifying.
Valerie, I just wanted to touch upon that. Glad you brought up betterments because people ask periodically about that. I think that, in Marshfield, I know at some point we'll probably have to have some kind of public discussion about betterments. In our town, betterments, and Bob would correct me if I'm wrong, but at least the last 20 years that I've been involved in a municipal government, betterments were used for sewer projects. But betterments in other areas of the country and on the East Coast, betterments are used because there's a public and a private benefit. There's a public benefit that everyone has the beaches. Private benefit, the person that owns the real estate's being protected. Now, some people might say, well, okay, if that property is protected, that's also a benefit to the town, but the costs are astronomical, as people, can hear tonight, that, these projects take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and there's a cost. They're very labor intensive to get the beach nourishment there. So, I think that we'll have to have more conversation about how we actually finance this. I mean, how many grants are available? How many times can you go to town meeting to get additional funding? And betterments will play a role, I think, in that.
Val, we've had another question about the fencing along Burke's Beach. Bob may want to join in after I start. Yes, we used to have fencing to restrict people from running, going through those dunes, etc. However, my understanding is there is a lawsuit involved between property owners and the town, and that fencing had to be taken down.
Yeah, so in the area that's between the public access, which is the end of Beach Avenue, and the jetty, the properties down there, a couple of homeowners have decided to register their land. And in the context of those land registration cases, one of which was resolved before I was town council, there was an agreement made with the property owner to take down some fencing. And another homeowner has filed a land registration case, and I guess is going to allow the fencing to remain on her property, but that's why some fencing came down. It was a settlement made as a part of a land registration case, and what the town got out of it was the right to use the beach portion of that person's property for general beach purposes. So we agreed to take down the fence, and the person didn't want it.
Thanks, Bob.
I think a few more questions.
Here's one. Does anyone know if any people in Fieldston or Sunrise Beach actually own the beach?
We haven't done the title research on the 66 properties that are there. What we're doing, I think, is just simply asking people to grant the easement, and to the extent that it's necessary, we're using it. I can tell you this, when Leslie mentioned the Wrexham beach, not the public beach, but the Winslow Avenue beach, the town fought a lawsuit over 13 years as to who owned the beach. And what we discovered was that the town owned the beach from a grant in 1685. And that beach never became private. That may not be true up the coast into that Fieldston area, because when Marshfield was growing in the early 1900s, parcels on what was probably beach were sold for $1 by the selectmen to develop the town. And it's, in some cases, the town may have conveyed rights to the beach. So we're just assuming that it's private for the sake of argument and asking people to cooperate with us and give us the easements. I think if we dug deep enough and we had enough money to do it, we'd probably find that many more beach areas are public.
Val, the deadline is February 22nd for,
Yeah, and there was a question there. Someone, okay, so yes, we may have sent letters in error to people. Again, somebody here is saying, I live on Fieldston Beach and I don't think I own any sand, beach. Please contact us. As Attorney Galvin is saying, it's possible that you may not, or that we think you could. And we want to, if you don't, and we don't need an easement from you, we may have sent you a letter in error, and that's quite possible. So we'd love to talk with you directly about your particular property so that we can be more clear on that.
Leslie, I've talked to a number of Marshfield residents, and basically how I left it with them is it may be town owned, but by getting the easements and having everybody provide us the easements, it is much simpler in order to get that for the permitting purposes. We have easements on all the properties, and then it's not a question that we have to research or anything else. So on our side, we were saying, please give us the easement regardless of whether or not you actually do own it, because it makes it easier for us on the permitting side.
Leslie, can you comment on this question about how will, it says, identify public access points? I think they must mean for the work, the nourishment, because there are no public access points to Duxbury Beach behind the dunes on Gurnet Road that I'm aware of. So I'm assuming that they must mean something about nourishment, or maybe they could clarify that question if that's not clear.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the plans right now so I can
Okay.
talk
There-
about
we're
where
not-
the
yeah.
construction access would be, but
We are not creating any public access whatsoever through private dunes to get to the beach by these proposed easements. Our goal is simply to say we want to place beach on the ocean side so that we can protect the homes. In order to get the money to do that, we need the easements, and we also need to allow for you to give us permission to place that sand. And the easements secure the right for the public to walk back and forth on that sand and cobble once we place it as nourishment in front of the homes, not over private dunes. The other thing, I'm looking at the chat while I'm talking here. The public is not being given any invitation to enjoy any new access to the beach. So those dunes, if you live in the neighborhood and you've been walking across those dunes in that Gurnet Road area, it's possible that you have your own private rights to cross those dunes. That's not something I'm familiar with. You would have to, clear that. That is not public access. Walking across those dunes is not public access to the beach, and we're not changing that. However, some people may have existing rights because they have rights in the common ways in that original subdivision layout when those lots were laid out. So some people do have the right that live in the neighborhood. I don't know what those rights are and wouldn't want to try to guess what those are. But people may just be using those to walk over to the beach. And as Mr. Galvin talked about earlier, that may be something that they've been doing for a long time. And that's not related to what we're talking about. We are not providing any permission for anyone that's new to walk across those private dunes to get to the beach.
yeah, then the only thing I'll add to that is that the construction access points, there is not one in that dune area. The only construction access points for the Bay Ave Gurnet Road section are Bay Ave ramp itself and around the very southern end of the project. Those are the only two construction access points.
There's a question that has to do with our discussion about doing regular replenishment versus the larger replenishment and which one's the more cost effective. I think it's important to clarify that if you put in the entire volume of what's designed for the project by Winslow Group, you get the level of protection that they've designed. If you put in a smaller volume, that does help the system, but it does not provide you with the same level of protection. So it's not as effective in terms of storm damage protection. So there's a big difference there that we wanted to clarify.
Rebecca, associated with that, if the towns are going to be looking to state or federal grant funding mechanisms to help offset the cost of these projects, would those grant funding authorities be looking at the level of protection and the duration associated with the projects?
I think it depends on the purpose of the project. If it's beneficial reuse, where the town's trying to take, if the Army Corps, for example, with the Green Harbor dredging, they currently put that in the near shore. If it was to be pumped on the beach or trucked to the beach, the Army Corps would, there would be a charge to the town for the additional cost of getting that on the beach. That's a specific cost just for the beneficial reuse. If it's a storm damage protection project, that's designed for much larger volume. So those are each very different projects. Each would be considered on the merits.
I have 3 points that I want to touch on. One is kind of a while back, we were talking about the beach profile and the dune, the nourishment that we're proposing along the wall and how that relates to where people sit. And a comment came back through saying, oh, so we'll be able to see people over the wall, and that's not something that we're comfortable with. And I just want to point out that once the sand is placed in that proposed profile, it's going to shift just like the sand does now. That sand moves every day with the tides. It's not going to stay in the shape that you see. That's the design for how it will be placed. And there's no guarantee that you'll be seeing people on the nourishment right next to your wall after 1 or 2 tides go through. That's just how, the beach will continue to do its natural thing and change with the seasons and change with the tides. So I don't want folks to just assume that that's going to be the profile that stays in place. It will move around. So it's not necessarily certain that you'll be seeing people right over that side of the wall after just a few cycles of tide. Another question was, and this is a way back, are we looking at sea level rise with respect to these improvements in the design of the wall? Yes. We are also looking at sea level rise with respect to access to these areas, which is relative to the bridges. So, and that's not everybody in Marshfield, but there are some folks in Marshfield and definitely on the Duxbury side. We are studying sea level rise, and we are studying the Canal Street, the Beach Street, and the Powder Point bridges with respect to that. And we are looking at how the water will come in from the bay side. That's not part of this project, but it's being done simultaneously and also by the Woods Hole Group with different funding. So we are examining how the other side of this Duxbury sand spit will be impacted by storms and sea level rise in addition to the wall side. And that's very important. And we are going to have that information this year as well to help us all talk about what's going on out there with the dynamics. And the last one I had here was someone was asking about insurance and where are we with the walls and repairs and so forth. Both towns, and more so Duxbury, are strapped for cash. We, as a town in Duxbury, don't have set-asides or long-term capital funding set-asides for infrastructure projects. That includes traffic signals, that includes sidewalks, That includes roads, that includes seawalls and nourishment. We don't do that as a community, and so it's more challenging for Duxbury to prepare for grant applications. And we've been having kind of an ongoing dialogue with everyone about how, yes, we realize that these are important things, and that's why we're full steam ahead, trying to get our permits in place and work with all of you to secure the necessary easements so that as soon as we can get the funding to do the work to try to maintain safety out there for the structures in the homes and for everyone to be able to enjoy the beach. But we don't have all the answers yet as to how we will get the funding. And as far as insurance, really what happens is similar to what happened in the 2018 storms. If those walls are damaged again, we can apply for grants. If there's a federal disaster, such there was in 2018, it's possible that FEMA will be able to help us with the repairs. If it's not a federal disaster, we will not have access to those kinds of funds like we did this time. So it's important for us to keep in mind that planning ahead and trying to reduce impacts to those walls will help us in the long term by nourishing those walls. While we try to figure out where we're going to get the funding, the nourishment of the walls will help keep everything more secure, because it's going to take time for us to figure this out. And we're all working together.
Val, there was also a question about whether the storms like 2018, if those substantially deplete the nourishment, what would there be any financial assistance? FEMA does have a program whereby if you have a designed engineered beach nourishment, which is what Woods Hole Group is designed, and that's maintained, then it is eligible for disaster assistance. So that's part of what you're doing by going through this process, is setting yourselves up for that disaster assistance. So just like your seawalls, you have to do maintenance to be eligible. The same with the beach, but you are, designing something that is hopefully a lot more sustainable and is going to reduce your damages so that you don't have as much damage as well.
Val, we got another email with a number of questions. I will probably need Rebecca, Leslie, and Bob to assist on these. First is, why aren't we using dredging directly onto beach as a renourishment process used throughout the East Coast that does not require easements? We are not Massachusetts is not Florida or North Carolina, which are two areas where I have seen it actually pumped directly from the offshore onto the beach. We're not in that type of situation. The offshore has to be permitted, and the likelihood of those permits being issued, again, takes time, money, and effort. They also want to know.
But Greg, can I add something to that?
Yep.
Just, I mean, if once we get the permits for these beach nourishment sites, we will be able to accept material from dredging projects or from an offshore borrow site. If there are permits for those other projects, for the dredging and the offshore borrow site, we can accept them and it can be pumped to the beaches, just like these people are talking about that they've seen in Florida and other areas. I don't know what the requirements are for public access easements in those other states, but Massachusetts has a very specific requirement that if public funds are used and dredging projects result in material being pumped up to the beaches using public funds, and they have to sign off on those easements onto private properties. So
there's also a federal requirement that if it's a federal project and there's material benefiting private properties, in those other states, I think you have public shoreline that's being nourished and it's not on private property. There's a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think keep in mind that Florida is more like the Spaniards got there and they had their way of doing things. And in New England, it was the Puritans and the king. And the king said, hey, thou shalt have the rights down to the tide line. That's not how it worked down in the South. And that's why it's so different. It's really about how we became a state. And we have to work with kind of what we have, which is this commonwealth that was generated out of the king.
Continuing, he
Sorry.
the other question was my understanding that this was the old practice in Green Harbor. I know in the past that when they were dredging, they used to pump it over the seawall and then bulldoze it across the beach. But the current equipment that's the Currituck, the Army Corps, we don't have that option anymore. We can't do that. Next question was, where does the dredge sand go now and why isn't it put back on the beach where it's needed? I've been told that this sand is sold to other private beaches. The Currituck dumps it offshore at the Duxbury Marshfield town line currently. That's my understanding. It is not sold to other beaches. The Army Corps does not bring it someplace else.
Greg, you're 100% correct on the dredge when the Currituck comes. Does get dropped offshore at a disposal site.
I think it's also important to note that even if we were pumping it offshore, if we were putting it on the beach, we'd still need that beach nourishment easement.
Yes, yes. There's a question here about if we could speak to the percent of material that would be sand versus stone. I think that's a really good question. And I think the easiest way to answer that is that the intent would be to nourish it with material that's compatible with what's there now. So if you have a mostly sandy beach, then you would get mostly sand. If you have a mixed sand and gravel and cobble beach, then that's what would be put on your beach. So the intent is not to change the characteristics of the beach. That said, a lot of these beaches do change seasonally in grain size, and that's something that we are trying to sort of put a finer point on and quantify with the regulatory agencies so that we have the flexibility to use, we have the widest flexibility to use material that's available to us, to the towns.
And the final statement on this email was, there are a lot of unknowns that have not been addressed appropriately. Liability, longevity, taxes, betterment impacts, success, etc. I would just say we have an opportunity to try to get beach nourishment in front of these seawalls. If people don't want it and it doesn't happen, what will eventually happen is these seawalls will collapse because there is no beach in front of them. And then the private properties directly behind those and the houses on the other side of Bay Ave and other locations will be damaged in storm events.
There's another question here about grants, but I feel like we've answered that. There are CZM grants, there are federal grants available to help fund construction, and other funding sources that you've heard Marshfield, Michael Moresco speak to. Are there any federal or state assistance to incentivize homeowners to lift or elevate their homes? Yes, there are. Talk to Val and Greg about that. That's separate from this project, but there are programs to help with that. Somebody wants to know where these slides are going to be posted on both town websites and the planning department tabs. Yes, you guys know?
Yes, yeah, sorry, yes, I typed in the answer. Yes,
sorry.
If you go to the planning department for Duxbury, there's a link from our page directly to Marshfield's page. And we also we've uploaded everything to the Duxbury's planning landing page. So you can see all of the meetings we've held, all of the studies that have been done, links to all the prior work that's been done by both towns with respect to this project and others. Both towns have done extensive studies and work to try to protect and enhance the shorelines as the years have gone by.
One other question I've seen here a couple of times is how will the existing stairs that go down to the beach or the ramp at Bay Ave or any of the other ramps, frankly, how will the design affect the current uses at those sites. So for example, at the Bay Ave site, are they going to have to drive up and over a dune or walk up and over a dune to get to the beach? No, I don't expect that at the Bay Ave site. I think we would just bring some of that sand into that little, into the Bay Ave ramp, and it would sort of feather or blend in to the dunes and the beach nourishment in front of the seawall. And that would really be the same for the stairways that go down to the beach. So we'd have to blend that dune that's right there near the stairways into the existing infrastructure so that you could still utilize those structures.
And Leslie, the Bay Ave ramp is eventually going to have to be redesigned because it sticks out and
Yeah.
it gets battered every time we have a storm and stuff. The DPW has considered in the past a different type of design that the ramp would be behind the wall, and that's where you would go up, so it is protected versus having the ramp stick outside of the wall. But again, that's we don't have DPW on tonight, and that's something that they have been looking at. And also to mention, one of the other things that is also being worked on, but not directly by this group, Army Corps of Engineers is looking at the redesign of the jetty. That has been going on for quite a while, and that could have some dramatic impacts on the beaches when that finally does take place.
So I feel like we've answered most of these questions, and I hope that the public feels like we've answered them.
Yeah, I think what I'll do is go through I've saved the chat. And that captured, what I did is I copied and pasted any questions that went into the Q&A into the chat. And what we can do is we'll try to take all of these questions, every single one of them, summarize them into a series of what'll probably be 20 or 30 questions that were asked with the answers. And then we welcome everyone to call. If we didn't answer your question, it's easier if you email, because then we can share it with others. Excuse me. But please keep communicating with us. Our goal here is to help everybody understand what we're trying to do. And a lot of times we're learning from talking with you what more we can do. So please call.
Or I would stress the email, because
please
then
email.
we can give it to the other people that will help answer questions.
I think the other thing to mention too is just remind people, the easements are so important. Without the easements, none of this will be able to be accomplished.
That's important.
Very important.
We cannot reconstruct the walls without these easements, because we cannot get the permits to do any more work on the walls unless we have the easements to do the permitting for the nourishment. So there will be no more wall improvements unless and until we're able to move forward with the nourishment permitting. So that's been made clear to us throughout this process, and I want to just restate that.
Leslie,
Now,
there's a
that is
request.
for the Duxbury side of things specifically, so we don't get people confused.
There's a request for the email slide, Leslie.
Oh,
And if you go to either town and just look for the planning department, you'll be able to find a link for both of us there as well. So we really appreciate it. We had a lot of people. It looked like we had about 100 people on the call. And that's a big investment on your part for coming to our meeting. And we really appreciate your time and your questions.
yeah, I would just echo what Val is saying, that we do appreciate everyone's time, and please continue to communicate with us and review the information on the town websites. Give us your feedback, spread the information to your friends and your neighbors. And please consider signing those easements so this project, for your benefit and that of everyone in both these towns, can proceed.
And I would also like to ask or add or remind folks that a significant amount of feasibility and alternatives analysis work and public outreach has gone into this project. A fair amount of it supported through grant funding through our office. And if folks have some additional questions about the background to the project, again, the previous slideshows and presentations from the previous outreach efforts are on there. So if you're interested in taking a look at those, that might help to inform your understanding of the project.
Well, I just want to take a minute to thank our panelists. Thank Mr. Maresco for coming as a town leader. It's very, we're grateful to have you here and have your interest. And we're very grateful and thankful to Coastal Zone Management for helping us with grant applications and the technical assistance. Very grateful to Sharon and to Bob for taking time to be with us this evening and to help us zero in on what we need to do to work with everyone. It's not an easy process for any of us to navigate. And Leslie, your knowledge and expertise is tremendous. So we really appreciate it. And Greg, you know, let's go have a beer. We'll be living through this together for a long time. So I appreciate your cooperation and working with me. And I think you do a fabulous job of answering the questions in your community, and your long-term residency there and your knowledge of the town is just excels and shines through when we work on projects like this. And I really appreciate your partnership.
Thank you, Val.
Thanks to you,
Yeah.
Val, too. Both you guys do a great job.
Thanks,
agree.
everyone.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Well, I wish everyone a good night.
Good night
Thank
to all.
you. Bye.